Before we begin, let me tell you what we do here. At the Last Prayer, we bring you real stories of redemption, courage, and transformation from the darkest corners of humanity. These aren't fairy tales, they're raw, unfiltered accounts of people who faced impossible choices and found light in the most unexpected places. Stories of gang members, prisoners, outcasts, and broken souls who discovered that change is always possible, even when the world has given up on them. If you're ready to witness true human drama that will challenge your perspective and touch your soul, then subscribe to The Last Prayer right now. Hit that notification bell, because every story we share could change the way you see the world. Now let's dive into today's story. Imagine that you're standing outside the most dangerous prison in Central America, where even armed guards refuse to enter certain blocks alone. The walls are stained with decades of violence, and the air itself seems to carry the weight of thousands of broken lives. Now imagine walking through those gates, completely alone, unarmed, with nothing but a worn Bible in your hands, into a courtyard filled with murderers, cartel enforcers, and men who've forgotten what mercy means. Imagine the silence that falls when you speak, a silence so profound that even the wind seems to hold its breath. This is exactly what happened one sweltering afternoon in San Salvador, and what follows is the true account of the day a pastor walked into hell and somehow made it listen. The sun hung low over San Salvador that Thursday afternoon, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement outside La Esperanza prison. The name was cruelly ironic, Hope, for a place where hope had been systematically executed, cell by cell, year after year. Father Miguel Ortega stood at the main gate, feeling the heat radiating from the concrete walls that rose 30 feet high, topped with coils of razor wire that gleamed like silver teeth in the dying light. He was 47 years old, lean from years of modest living, with hands that showed the calluses of manual labor from his youth. His black shirt stuck to his back with sweat, and he carried only his grandfather's Bible, its leather cover worn smooth by generations of nervous fingers. The guards at the gate had already explained 3 times that they wouldn't escort him inside. Protocol had changed after the last incident. A social worker had been taken hostage 6 months ago. It took 4 days to negotiate his release, and he'd left in an ambulance, catatonic. "Father, you understand what you're asking?" The head guard, Sergeant Ramirez, was a compact man with tired eyes that had seen too much. Block C is where we send the ones even the other prisoners fear. MS-13, Barrio 18, cartel enforcers, they run that block. We don't. We just lock the doors and pray they don't break them down. Miguel nodded slowly. I understand. You'll have no radio. No panic button. If something happens, we can't help you. By the time we organize a response team and gear up, it'll be too late. Ramirez's voice dropped lower. Father, I've worked here 11 years. I've seen good men go in and come out broken. I've seen bad men go in and never come out at all. This isn't a church. This isn't even really a prison anymore. It's a kingdom, and you're about to walk into someone else's kingdom. Miguel met his gaze. Then maybe it's time that kingdom heard a different kind of message. Ramirez studied him for a long moment, then sighed and unlocked the first gate. The sound of the lock turning echoed like a gunshot. God go with you, Father. Someone needs to. The walk from the outer gate to Block C took 7 minutes, but it felt like crossing into another country. The prison was divided into territories as clearly as any map, with invisible borders enforced by violence. The first courtyard was relatively calm men playing cards, smoking cigarettes rolled from newspaper, their conversation stopping as Miguel passed. They watched him with curiosity more than malice. This strange figure in black walking alone, where even the guards moved in pairs. But as he approached the inner gates, the atmosphere changed. The graffiti on the walls grew darker, more elaborate. Skulls intertwined with roses and crosses, names of the dead memorialized in spray paint. Gang signs layered over each other like a history written in symbols only the initiated could fully read. The air smelled different here, sweat and sewage, yes, but something else. Fear. It had a scent, metallic and sharp, and it clung to everything. The gate to Block C stood open. Nobody locked it from the inside anymore. The inmates preferred to control their own access, and the prison administration had quietly accepted this reality. Miguel paused at the threshold, closing his eyes for a moment. He wasn't praying, not exactly. He was listening to the silence inside himself, that still point where fear and faith met and somehow coexisted. Then he stepped through. The courtyard was roughly 50 meters square, surrounded by 3-story cell blocks that created a canyon of concrete and despair. At least 200 men occupied this space, some shirtless in the heat, their bodies covered in the elaborate tattoos that told the stories of their crimes and allegiances. Others sat in small clusters, their eyes constantly moving, watching for threats or opportunities. Along the walls, makeshift shelters had been constructed from cardboard and stolen blankets, creating a shantytown within a prison. When Miguel entered, the conversation didn't stop immediately. It died in waves like a ripple spreading across water. The men nearest the gate fell silent first, their eyes fixing on this unexpected visitor. Then the ones behind them noticed and stopped talking. Within 30 seconds, the entire courtyard had gone quiet, and Miguel found himself the focus of hundreds of eyes, many of them belonging to men who'd killed for far less than the perceived disrespect of an uninvited visitor. He walked forward slowly, his boots scraping against the concrete. Nobody moved to stop him, but nobody stepped aside either. He was forced to navigate around small groups, meeting the eyes of men who stared back with expressions ranging from curiosity to cold assessment to barely contained rage. One man, heavily muscled with the number 13 inches tattooed across his throat, stepped directly into Miguel's path. He was perhaps 30, with scars crossing his face in patterns that suggested knife fights survived. "You lost, priest." Miguel stopped, but didn't step back. "No, I'm exactly where I need to be." "Yeah? And where's that?" "Wherever people need to hear that they're not forgotten." The man's eyes narrowed. "We ain't forgotten. That's the problem. Everybody remembers what we did. Nobody forgets. That's why we're here. I'm not talking about what you did," Miguel said quietly. "I'm talking about who you are. Those aren't the same thing." A laugh came from somewhere in the crowd, harsh and disbelieving. Others joined in, but the sound was strained, nervous. The tattooed man didn't laugh. He studied Miguel for another long moment, then stepped aside. Not an invitation, exactly, but permission to continue. Miguel walked to the center of the courtyard, where a makeshift stage had been constructed from stacked pallets. It was used for announcements, disputes, and occasionally impromptu entertainment. He climbed onto it, the old wood creaking under his weight, and turned to face the assembled crowd. The silence was absolute now. Even the birds that sometimes roosted in the rafters seemed to have fled. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky above the walls in shades of orange and purple, colors too beautiful for this place. Miguel didn't open his Bible. He just looked at the faces before him, men in their 20s and 30s mostly, though some were younger and a few showed the gray hair of those who'd spent decades behind these walls. He saw suspicion and anger, yes, but underneath that, something else. Exhaustion. A bone-deep weariness that came from years of maintaining a constant mask of hardness. "I didn't come here to judge anyone," he said, and his voice carried across the courtyard without shouting. Years of speaking from pulpits had taught him how to project. "I know what you're thinking. Here comes another one who wants to save our souls, wants to tell us how to live, wants to explain why we should repent and change and become someone we're not." He paused, letting the words settle. "But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because I know something about you that you might have forgotten. I know that every single person in this courtyard was once a child. Once someone held you and told you that you mattered. Once you had dreams that didn't involve these walls. Once you believed the world was bigger than this, and that you could be part of that bigger world." A voice from the back, young and aggressive. "That's bullshit. Nobody ever told me I mattered." Miguel turned toward the voice, though he couldn't see the speaker. "Then I'm telling you now, you matter. You whoever just spoke, you matter. Your life has value beyond the worst thing you've ever done. That's not sentiment. That's not me trying to make you feel better. That's truth. Truth? The tattooed man who'd confronted him earlier climbed onto the platform beside Miguel. Up close, he was even more intimidating, his presence radiating barely controlled violence. You want to talk about truth, priest? The truth is we're in here because society decided we were trash, disposable. The truth is most of us were born into this, born into gangs, born into poverty, born into violence. We didn't choose this life. It chose us. Miguel nodded. You're right. And that's exactly why I'm here. Because if the world has given up on you, someone needs to remember that giving up isn't the same as truth. The world gave up on me too once. That got their attention. The tattooed man's eyes narrowed. What? 23 years ago, I was in a prison not much different from this one. Different country, same despair. I'd killed a man in a robbery that went wrong. I was 19 years old, looking at 25 years, and I wanted to die. I tried 3 times. They kept finding me, bringing me back, putting me in isolation. And I hated them for it. The courtyard was so quiet now that Miguel could hear the distant sounds of the city beyond the wall's traffic, a dog barking, life continuing as if this place didn't exist. I met a priest there, Father Antonio. He was old, walked with a cane, had this habit of humming hymns under his breath, and he wouldn't leave me alone. Kept coming to my cell, trying to talk to me. I cursed at him, spit at him, told him I'd kill him if he came back. He came back. Every single day for 3 months. Miguel's hands were steady on his Bible now, finding comfort in its familiar weight. One day, I asked him why. Why did he keep coming when I'd made it clear I wanted nothing to do with him? You know what he said? He said, because I see you, not what you did, not what you've become. I see the child you were and the man you could still be. And I refuse to pretend that person doesn't exist. And that changed you? The tattooed man's voice was skeptical but not mocking. Just like that, some old priest's words made you a different person? No, Miguel said firmly. It took years. It took work, the hardest work I've ever done. It took looking at myself honestly, accepting what I'd done, accepting the pain I'd caused. It took learning that redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about not letting the past erase your future. A new voice. This one from an older man sitting against the wall. That's easy to say when you're out there, free with your life ahead of you. We're in here. Most of us aren't ever getting out. What's the point of redemption if it doesn't change anything? Miguel turned toward the speaker, a man in his 50s with gray streaking his hair and tattoos faded by time. Does it have to change your circumstances to change you? If you become a better man inside these walls, is that worthless? If you choose tomorrow to treat the person next to you with dignity instead of violence, does that not matter because you're still in prison? He stepped down from the platform, moving into the crowd. Men shifted to let him pass, and he walked up to the older prisoner. What's your name? Carlos. Carlos, how long have you been here? 17 years. And how many more? Life, no parole. Miguel crouched down so they were at eye level. Then you have a choice, Carlos. You can spend the next 30 or 40 years maintaining the hardness that helped you survive the first 17. You can die the same man you came in as, maybe even harder, more bitter, more convinced that the world's cruelty justifies your own. Or, he paused, you can decide that these walls contain your body but not your soul. You can choose to be the man who helps instead of hurts, who protects instead of praise, who remembers that everyone in this courtyard was once someone's child. Carlos's eyes, which had been hard as stone, flickered with something Miguel recognized. Not hope, that was too much to ask, but possibility. The faintest acknowledgement that perhaps the equation wasn't as fixed as he'd believed. Miguel stood and addressed the crowd again. I'm not here to tell you that faith will open these doors. I'm not here to promise that prayer will reverse your sentences or convince the world to forgive you. The honest truth is that most of you will spend decades here, maybe your entire lives. And that's a reality I can't change. He let that sink in. watching faces harden again as they prepared for the platitudes they'd heard before. But he didn't deliver them. What I can tell you is this. You have the power right now to decide what kind of man you'll be inside these walls. Will you be the predator or the protector? Will you use your strength to take from those weaker or to defend them? Will you pass on the violence that was done to you, or will you break that chain? The tattooed man was watching him intently now, arms crossed but posture less aggressive. You make it sound simple. It's not. In here, weakness gets you killed. Kindness gets you killed. The only law is strength. I'm not talking about weakness, Miguel said. I'm talking about a different kind of strength. The strength to be honest about the pain you've caused and the pain you carry. The strength to admit that maybe, just maybe, the hardness you've cultivated isn't armor. It's a prison inside a prison. A younger voice. Maybe early 20s. My little brother's in here too. Different block. He's 17 and they're already recruiting him for the gang. If I don't stay hard, if I don't maintain my reputation, they'll use him to get to me. That's reality, priest. Your words don't change that. Miguel's expression softened. What's your name? Diego. Diego, you're right. My words won't protect your brother. But maybe your choices will. If you become someone different, maybe he sees a different path. Maybe he sees that strength isn't just about who you can hurt, but who you can protect and how you protect them. You don't understand. I understand that cycles exist because people maintain them. I understand that someone has to be the first to break them, and that person rarely gets rewarded for it. Often they get punished. But I also understand that every cycle in history that ever ended, every pattern of violence that ever stopped ended because someone decided it would end with them. The sun had fully set now, and the courtyard was lit by harsh fluorescent lights that cast stark shadows. Guards appeared at the gates, silhouettes watching from a safe distance, waiting to see if this experiment in faith would end in violence. A man in the back stood up slowly. He was massive, easily 6.5 feet tall, with the build of someone who'd spent years turning their body into a weapon. His arms were covered in intricate tattoos, and across his chest in Gothic script were the words, "Born to Kill." He began walking toward Miguel, and the crowd parted like water. Miguel felt his heart rate increase, but kept his expression calm. This was the moment. Either his words had meant something, or they hadn't. The man stopped 3 feet away, close enough that Miguel could see the scars on his knuckles, the places where the tattoos didn't quite hide the damage underneath. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then the man said, in a voice surprisingly soft for his size, "My name is Raphael. I've been in here 9 years. I got life for killing 3 people rival gang members who'd attacked my neighborhood. I was 21, and I thought I was protecting my family. I thought I was a soldier in a war." He paused, jaw working as if the next words were physically difficult to produce. "I've done things in here," his voice caught. "Things that haunt me every night. Things I did to survive, to maintain respect, to protect the guys from my block. And I keep telling myself it was necessary, that it was them or us, that I didn't have a choice." Raphael's eyes met Miguel's, and for the first time, the hardness cracked. "But lately I've been thinking, what if I did have a choice? What if every time I chose violence, I was just making myself into something worse? My daughter's 12 now. She visits once a month. And every time I see her, I see this look in her eyes, like she's scared of me. Her own father, and she's scared." His voice broke completely now. "I don't want to be this anymore. I don't want her to remember me as the monster. But I don't know how to be anything else. I've been this for so long that I don't remember who I was before." Miguel stepped forward slowly, giving Raphael time to back away if he needed to. When Raphael didn't move, Miguel placed his hand on the bigger man's shoulder. "Then let's remember together. Who were you before? Before the gangs, before the violence, before the walls." Raphael's breath came in shuddering gasps now, and Miguel realized the man was crying silent, wrenching sobs that shook his massive frame. "I wanted to be a teacher. I loved kids. I was good with them. I used to help my little cousins with homework. and they'd listen to me. They trusted me. Then be that man again, not out there and here. Tomorrow find someone younger who's struggling and help them. Don't recruit them into violence. Teach them something. Show them that there's another way to be strong. Raphael nodded, unable to speak, and Miguel pulled him into an embrace. For a moment the courtyard held its breath, waiting to see if this display of vulnerability would invite attack. But something had shifted in the air. Other men were standing now, moving closer, not with aggression, but with something else. Recognition. Another man spoke up, his voice hoarse. I beat a man to death with my hands over a drug debt, $20. I took a life for $20. And I can't even remember his name. And then another. I shot a 15-year-old because he wore the wrong colors in the wrong neighborhood. I see his face every night. And another. I've hurt people in here, people weaker than me, because I could, because it made me feel powerful. And I hate myself for it. The confessions came like a dam breaking, men stepping forward with their burdens, their guilt, their pain. Miguel moved among them, listening, acknowledging, offering not absolution, that wasn't his to give but witness. He bore witness to their stories, to their humanity underneath the crimes and the hardness. Carlos, the older prisoner, stood up. I killed my wife's lover and then tried to kill her. Spent 17 years telling myself she deserved it, that she drove me to it. But the truth is, I was a coward who couldn't handle rejection. And I destroyed 2 families because of it. He looked around at the other men. Maybe the priest is right. Maybe we can't change what we did, and maybe we can't leave this place. But we can change what this place is. We can decide that tomorrow, Block C is different, that we don't prey on each other, that we protect the weak instead of exploiting them, that we remember who we wanted to be before the world taught us to be what we became. The tattooed man who'd first challenged Miguel climbed back onto the platform. My name is Marcos. I've been called a lot of things: monster, animal, killer, and I've earned all those names. But my daughter's name is Sophia, and she's 6 years old. And when she visits me, I want her to see a father, not a beast. He looked directly at Miguel. I don't know if I believe in God. I don't know if I believe in redemption. But I believe in that little girl. And I believe she deserves better than a father who's become the thing his own father was. The thing I swore I'd never be. Marcos turned to address the crowd. Tomorrow things change in Block C. We don't prey on the weak. We don't settle disputes with blood. We find another way. And if you can't accept that, if you need the violence to feel strong, then you deal with me first. It was a challenge and a promise, delivered with the authority of someone who'd earned respect through years of violence and now chose to redirect it. The crowd murmured, and Miguel could feel the resistance. Change wouldn't come easy, and there would be those who'd fight to maintain the old ways. But something fundamental had shifted. A young guard appeared at the gate, nervous. Father Ortega, it's past lockdown. We need to. He stopped, taking in the scene. The 200 men standing in small groups, talking quietly instead of the usual chaos of evening. The absence of hostility in the air. Miguel nodded. I'm coming. He turned back to the crowd. I'll return tomorrow if you'll have me. Not to preach, not to convert, but to listen. To remind you that you're more than the worst thing you've ever done. To help you remember who you were and who you might still become. Raphael stepped forward. We'll have you, Father, and we'll hold each other accountable. The ones who want to change will support each other. The ones who don't, he looked around meaningfully, they'll know they're choosing to be alone. As Miguel walked toward the gate, men reached out, not aggressively, but to touch his hand, his shoulder, seeking connection with someone who'd seen past their armor to the wounded humans underneath. One young man, maybe 19, with tears streaming down his face, whispered, "My mother used to take me to church. I haven't thought about that in years. Thank you for reminding me." Miguel paused at the gate and turned back. Before I go, I want to say one more thing. What happened here tonight? This honesty, this vulnerability that took more courage than any act of violence. Every man who spoke, who admitted his pain and guilt, who chose to be human instead of hard, You're the bravest men I've ever met. Remember that tomorrow when the daylight comes and the old patterns try to reassert themselves. Remember that you were brave tonight. The guard escorted him out, both of them silent as they walked through the corridors back toward the outer gates. Sergeant Ramirez was waiting, his face showing amazement and disbelief. We watched on the security cameras. I've been here 11 years, Father, and I've never seen anything like that. What did you say to them? Miguel smiled tiredly. I reminded them of something they'd forgotten, that they're human, that they matter, that who they are isn't fixed by what they've done. Do you think it'll last? Change like that? I don't know, Miguel said honestly. Tomorrow might be different. Some of them might return to the old ways. But some won't, and those who don't will influence others. Transformation doesn't happen all at once. It happens in small choices, repeated day after day, until the small choices become habits, and the habits become character. As he walked out into the cool night air, Miguel felt the exhaustion hit him. His hands were shaking slightly, the adrenaline finally fading. He'd walked into that courtyard not knowing if he'd walk out. He'd faced men who could have killed him without thinking twice. But he'd also witnessed something miraculous, not supernatural, but deeply human. The moment when people remember they have choices, when they realize the stories they tell themselves about who they are, can be rewritten. 3 months later, Block C had transformed. Not completely. There were still incidents, still violence, still men who chose hardness over vulnerability. But a core group had formed, led by Marcos and Rafael, dedicated to creating a different culture. They held regular meetings where men could speak honestly about their struggles. They protected younger inmates from recruitment into gangs. They established rules about consent and dignity that were enforced not by guards, but by the community itself. Miguel visited weekly, but he wasn't the leader. He was the witness, the reminder, the person who'd sparked something but had the wisdom to let it grow on its own. The transformation of Block C became known throughout the prison system. Other blocks requested similar interventions. Guards reported decreased violence. Administrators began to see the inmates not as animals to be contained, but as men capable of growth. But the most profound changes were invisible to security cameras and incident reports. They happened in quiet moments, when Rafael taught a young prisoner to read, when Carlos mediated a dispute between rival gang members before it escalated to violence, when Marcos wrote letters to his daughter describing not who he'd been, but who he was becoming. The pastor who walked into El Salvador's most dangerous prison without guards didn't change those men. They changed themselves. He'd simply reminded them that change was possible, that their past didn't have to determine their future, and that even in the darkest place, humanity could reassert itself if given permission and support. Years later, when Miguel was asked about that day, he always said the same thing. I didn't save anyone. They saved themselves. I just held up a mirror and reminded them of who they could see if they looked hard enough. Final reflection. This story isn't just about a prison in El Salvador. It's about every moment when we believe we're defined by our worst actions, when we think change is impossible, when we've built walls around ourselves that seem too high to ever climb over. The truth that Miguel understood and that those men discovered is that transformation isn't about forgetting who we've been. It's about refusing to let our past be the only story we tell about ourselves. Every single person reading this has done things they regret. We've hurt people, made choices we wish we could undo, become versions of ourselves we never intended to be. And like those prisoners, we often build hardness around that guilt, telling ourselves it's armor when really it's another prison. But here's what Miguel knew. You're not the sum of your worst moments. You're the sum of your choices moving forward. Every day you wake up, you have the opportunity to be different. Not perfect, not erased of your past, but different, better, more aligned with who you want to be. The prisoners in Block C didn't escape their circumstances. They remained behind walls, but they found freedom in choosing who they'd be within those walls. They discovered that even when external conditions can't change, internal transformation is always possible. So ask yourself, What walls have you built around your heart? What stories do you tell yourself about why you can't change? What would happen if, like those men, you chose vulnerability over hardness, growth over stagnation, hope over resignation? The answer isn't easy. Transformation never is. But it's always, always possible. If this story moved you, if it made you think about your own capacity for change, then do something for me. Subscribe to The Last Prayer right now. Hit that notification bell. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Because these stories, these real accounts of human transformation, deserve to be heard. And maybe, just maybe, they'll remind you that no matter where you are in life, no matter what you've done, you have the power to write a different ending. Welcome to The Last Prayer, where every story is a testament to the unbreakable human spirit. Subscribe now, and let's walk this journey together.